Okay. Good afternoon and welcome to the inaugural episode of another Bitcoin podcast. Today I'm joined by Jeff Booth, who I'm very privileged to have here today. He is a serial entrepreneur, a technologist and a thought leader. He's also he co-founded Build Direct and is more recently a founding partner in Ego Death Capital, which is an investment company that funds innovation in the Bitcoin space. But he also authored the best-selling book, The Price of Tomorrow, why deflation is the key to an abundant future. And that's really what I'd like to talk to him mainly about today. So Jeff Booth, welcome.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here today. Okay. So I wanted to start with the book, if I may. And part of the reason I'm sort of doing this is to try to help to orange pill some of my friends and family. So I know that many of those won't be familiar with the book. So for people who aren't familiar, could you perhaps just sort of outline your thesis and what you went through and give us sort of a Cliff Notes version of what the thesis is, please?
The thesis is that the free market, the natural state of the free market, is deflation, and that is because that we as builders of products, entrepreneurs, people who work for entrepreneurs, anything in the free market is competing against things that were there before. And as buyers or users of those products, we only use what gives us more value. In other words, being an entrepreneur or working in a company that's creating value for society, the output of that, because people only use you if it's valuable for them, the output is deflationary from that. And then once you invent things or discover things like technology that creates AI, that creates more efficiency, more productivity, that should mean faster deflation. And when I say deflation for your friends or simply, I mean prices fall broadly. And just as a simple thought experiment, you could ask yourself, what would you do if Google charged $5 a click? Would you use something different?
You'd use.
And of course you would, right? Of course you would. So you are part of the equation. You are a big part of the equation that makes prices fall. So if that's the natural state of the free market, and as we drive more and more learnings on top of that, more and more error correction on top of that, and create more efficiency, what is people trying to create more value, and that moves faster and faster and exponentially. What that should mean from that world is prices. You are getting richer every year, even if you're not working. Prices are falling so fast every year. And if you're working or if you're building more value than other people for an economy, then you're even getting wealthier faster. But the output of this is prices fall forever, and they keep falling. Now, we don't live in that system, so something's stopping those prices from falling, and that something stopping those prices from falling are central bank policies that are manipulating money. So first, increasing debt, and then that, because the debt can't be paid back, if you allowed deflation, if you let prices fall from that system from the debt gets more expensive and it can't be repaid. So instead of allowing that debt to fail, and the companies that hold that debt to fail, we continually bail out that debt with taxpayer dollars to be able to steal from taxpayers through inflation to pay back that debt. And that has to be, that manipulated money has to expand and expand and expand. So the entire construct that people live in, they're measuring from a system. So you're living in almost two worlds, right? Or one the way it should be, one the way most people are measuring the world from. And the way that most people are measuring the world from has to get worse. And all of the externalities from the manipulation of money, the centralization, big tech, big pharma, all big government, all of these externalities are as a result of the manipulation of money. It can't be solved from that system. It has to be solved from a new system. So and I described in the book what that looked like and how most people were measuring from the system creating the problem. And there was no solve. There was no solve from that system.
So you use some sort of fairly sort of big terms like theft, but also deflation's a bit of a dirty word, or in the current monetary system it is. Why is deflation a good thing then, or is it only a good thing if it's in a new system?
Yeah, so it's only good. So simply, it's only a good thing from a system that allows that productivity to flow to you. Deflation is a bad word from an existing system that requires inflation to remain solvent, because everything you measure, every bank, every grocery store, everything, all of your political institutions, everything is on top of that system that requires inflation. So if you allowed deflation, the whole thing collapses.
Yeah.
It just keeps on unwinding. The house that people think is worth, call it $1 million, is not worth $1 million. With deflation, it falls to its utility value. In fact, houses are a really good example of what's happening. People realize that inflation equals wage deflation. So what it means is if you don't own assets, if you don't own stocks, or if you don't own houses, if you just have your money in the bank, or if you're working for wages, you're getting your pocket picked at an extraordinary rate. And because houses are being used as a store of value because you can't save your money in the bank, they have a monetary premium because people store their value in a house. And so the house loses what it used to be when 50 years ago, a utility where you'd raise your family. It turns into an asset. The only way you can escape the debasement of your currency is to put money in housing. And if that's true, then housing increases its worth by the monetary premium. And more people race into housing, and for most of the population, then they can't afford the housing, and they're getting their pocket picked faster and faster and faster as the cycle gets worse and worse. And what do those people do? They turn to government to make government bigger, to provide bailouts, to make the problem worse. So they make all of those people typically make the problem worse by thinking it's big business when it's in fact manipulated. It is big business too, because they're in coordination with the manipulation of money, but it's actually more a function of the manipulation of money. Prices should fall in a free market, and you have to say that over and over and over again, because what that means is you don't live in a free market. You live in a control system disguised as a free market. If you lived in a free market, your life would get better every year because prices would fall naturally. And you wouldn't need the job. You wouldn't need to work 60, 80 hours a week to be able to pay for things that are artificially moving up in price, because they would continue to fall in price.
I think that's such a difficult concept for people to grasp, because it literally is the inverse of what is currently what we've been brought up with and what we live with for, well, probably for most of our lifetimes, really, in most cases.
That's so, and all of our history books.
Yeah.
And all of our history books have a flaw of money. If you can control money, you control people. Because and just if you think about it just easily, right? If you could solve the world's problems by printing more pieces of paper, don't you think we would have solved that a long time ago?
Yeah.
If you could make everybody richer by just printing more pieces of paper, because that's all the money is right now. It's a piece of paper, right? It's an instrument that, and you've probably heard me say this many times, abundance in money creates scarcity everywhere else. And scarcity in money creates abundance. Scarcity in money creates abundance because it forces the free market to work. And the free market is the most effective thing we've ever found to coordinate people in service of other people. Because the only way you can win is be in service of other people in the free market. In fact, there's no such thing as a monopoly in a free market, because it cannot exist for long. Because if you have monopoly profits, then those profits are high and they attract other entrepreneurs to be able to attack you and deliver more value. So there is no such thing as monopoly in a truly free market. So why you said it perfectly. We don't have the mental wiring. We don't have the neurons. We don't have the mental lattice. If we've never in history seen what I'm talking about, it would be really hard why your friends are stuck. Why your friends it's be really hard to relearn and reimagine what it could look like, what it should look like under the rules of a new system.
There's so many sort of directions I'd like to sort of splinter off in, but there was one thing that you said sort of earlier on, which was that as things get worse, people will demand essentially more help from the government, which is they'll demand more help from the system, which is actually causing the problem. And part of preparing for this was rereading The Greatest Game, which is an article that you wrote, I think in 2020 or
2020, yeah.
2020, yeah. And you sort of describe how this plays out, and the very first thing is that there'll be a trend towards socialism, which is exactly what's happening in the UK at the moment, and people are demanding more and more help, not realising that that's part of the problem. It's going to accelerate the problem, and we're going to give up more and more of our freedoms and sovereignty. And I don't particularly want to get into what's sort of happening in the UK at the moment, but in terms of a solution, then in the book you quite famously only talk about Bitcoin right at the end, and I don't know whether I'd be intrigued to know whether that was a deliberate thing or whether that was because you were still sort of processing being orange pill yourself at that time. But what does Bitcoin offer that changes this path?
Yeah, and first I'll explain and I've explained this on podcasts before. So while I bought Bitcoin, toyed around with it in 2017, I didn't really come to a deeper understanding. I came to a deeper understanding through writing the book that it could be one possible path to the future that I imagined. But I still thought at the end of the book, I still thought at the end of the book that it was had about a 5% probability of failing or getting centralized or being insecure. So it didn't have a 5% probability of failing. That was my misunderstanding of it at that time. So combine that with, I wanted to set up the problem first so that people could start to understand what a solution to solve the paradox. Because it is true that we're living in a control system that's getting worse. And as AI accelerates and more people lean in, so AI is a massive productivity tool. And as more people are fearful of their jobs going away and they reach to government and they spread, it's going to accelerate and centralize faster. And can you imagine living in a world where you don't have banking access because the government could turn it off for whatever you say, and can completely remove your access and privilege for anything? Forget your government today. Like if you look around the world and you can see both parties in all different countries, all parties are sitting on top of theft in a system. It's just manipulation of money. So if you had theft in the underlying currency, and all of the politicians on top of that were emboldened by that theft, really what ends up happening is it's just theater. It's who's stealing more money from you and pretending they're not. And as it centralizes faster and faster, and more people make it stronger with their actions by voting within that system. So So I wanted to lay out the problem in a way that people could understand how great that was, because us as society have never seen this before. We've never seen technology moving at this rate before. So we were likely to misunderstand how fast this would happen in this centralizing function. And then I put Bitcoin in just as a paragraph, as a potential resolve to the conflict. And then through deeper work trying to disprove that hypothesis that it was a resolve to the conflict, I became convinced that it was the only path to the other side, to the world that I'm talking about, where 8 billion people are in service of 8 billion people, and your life gets better as a result of that, and the control structure gets smaller as the system of that forces hope, truth, abundance to you gets stronger. So one gets weaker, one gets stronger, and today it's inverted. The centralized system is stronger and stronger and stronger through most people. And why? Because most people are giving it more strength through all their actions.
Yeah, I think like a paradigm shift like that is it's so difficult for people to grasp. But
well, here can I just jump in here? And it's not difficult. It's probably not difficult for you to grasp. It's probably why you decided to spend some of your time and launch this podcast, so you could help others grasp it. Now, it might have been difficult for you to grasp 4 years ago, but as through more and more work, you're understanding that everything I'm saying here is true, right? And we need a new paradigm, and a paradigm that works for all of us. And so then you have to then you attack Bitcoin with the same intellectual vigor to say, could this stay decentralized and secure, and could it provide that protocol level change, and is it immune from all these attacks? And you get to the point that it is. Now carry that forward. What that means for you, what that means for me, is I am living in the new world already. Right? All my prices are falling, just like I said they would. The house I'm sitting in, if I measure in the fiat currency, it was $1.4 million 4 years ago, and now it's $2.1 million. If I measure in Bitcoin, it was 300 Bitcoin 4 years ago, and now it's 22 Bitcoin. So by measuring in Bitcoin, I'm seeing, and by the way, in 4 years, this house will be worth, I suspect, about 2 Bitcoin. So I'm seeing all prices falling to the utility value or marginal cost of production in Bitcoin terms. So if you're living and measuring from the system that is not being manipulated, you're seeing exactly what I'm saying. And you don't have to wait for your government to say yes. It's an open protocol. So you can just move your time and energy to it, and you'll see it too. And so now I think about that transition. I would say most of the podcasts I do, and most people talking about it, they're so scared of the transition because they're thinking in a light switch. One day we're living in this system, the next day we're living in this system. It won't look like that. It will look like a gradual change for every single person. And the gradual change to a better life, the earlier you move into Bitcoin, the better it'll feel. And that'll pull more and more people in. And exactly why you're launching this podcast, to try to help some of your friends, is exactly the same thing that slowly moves across society, because more people start to understand this, and they can do their own work to say, is this true or not? And they'll find out it is true.
And I have to say that it's your words on. I mean, I've watched dozens and dozens of the podcasts that you've been on, and it's your words about spending more time in the world that you want to be in. That's what has put me on this path to do this. I mean, I think you've put in your book as well that you're one of the groups that you would say you belong to is introvert, and I certainly would put myself in that as well. So this is definitely out of my comfort zone, but it certainly inspired me. But one of my kind of I love the analogies. I love the analogies that you give. I love the analogies that Michael Saylor gives. I think they're really easy way for people to sort of get a grasp of these concepts. One of the things that worries me is I'm definitely a big believer of the idea of Bitcoin being a lifeboat, and I feel like I've identified that I've secured my place on the lifeboat, but most of my life is still on the Titanic. I know it's sinking, and I'm still on there. And my worry is, am I going to be able to get off the Titanic in time to make it to the lifeboat? And I suppose that's perhaps an analogy for staying solvent enough in the Titanic world to be able to make that transition.
Yeah, so that's interesting, and it has, so like you said, it has so many vectors, right? You could talk about this forever. But remember, we're talking about two different systems that work just about completely inverse of each other. So in the one system, in the Titanic system, that is an existing system, it's going to centralize further. You take leverage, you take tons of leverage to buy a house. If there's a tightening, interest rates go up, you get liquidated, and it's all a debt-based system, and it's getting worse and worse and worse, and that's going to be really volatile. It's going to get worse. But what people are trying to do, I think you probably read my Finding Signal in a Noisy World article as well. What people are trying to do, money's only information. It describes what you really want. You don't want more money. You want what you think more money will buy you. So if information itself in money is being manipulated, then you could expect everything else from on top of that to be manipulated. How could you find truth on top of that when it's all being manipulated at the root? And so that construct of you wanting more money is, or imagine you had very little somewhere else in the world that is even worse than you in the UK. And it's as a result of US policies stealing from those people, right? Extracting more and more value from those people. Imagine if you were lower on the social economic ladder, you would feed in more. You would give it more strength because you're so desperate for enough to feed your family, to be able to, and you might get on a boat and go to another country like the UK where they didn't steal as much from you, and then and take the risk of being persecuted there versus your home. You would do the same thing to protect your family. So depending where you are on this level, you can see that most often the natural state of people is to actually make the system stronger through their actions. You've started to move time into Bitcoin, and that probably came with, I'm going to buy some, I'm going to self-custody, I'm going to then create a podcast, maybe you run a node. As you do more of those action steps, let's say you're spending 90% of your time let's call it 99% of your time in the fiat world and 1% of the time here. If you move to 2% of your time, it will feel that much better, and it'll magnify, it'll get that much better. Then you'll spend 4% of your time. Then you'll spend 8% of your time. And the best way to look at this transition is to do what's right for you. Go to what you're doing right now is a really great, so don't imply to somebody that they have to move 100% of their time in Bitcoin. Don't begrudge them for not doing that. Encourage them to learn and understand why they might want to spend a little bit of time, and then more time, and then more time, and that's how the world changes. It's just one person at a time, understanding that they truly decide the world they want to live in through their actions.
You mentioned finding signal in a noisy world, and you talked about truth as well. And there's a passage in the book where you talk about the energy transition, and you focus in on solar power. And I think in some quarters, the topic of climate change is still quite a controversial subject, and some people sort of sit on one side, some people sit on the other. And I forget where exactly where I read it, but there's sort of a concept of you taking a topic that you feel that you understand quite deeply. So let's say in your case economics, and looking at how the mainstream media reports on it, and let's throw Bitcoin in there as well. Most of up until quite recently, most of the mainstream narrative on Bitcoin is essentially false. And then we can look at things like CPI, which we also know are pretty false metrics. And even how inflation is presented occasionally as being something that's beneficial to us. I sort of have this kind of skeptical mindset that if I take economics and how that's portrayed in the mainstream media, and then I'll take another topic, example, climate change, where there are incentives to perhaps not tell the truth as well. How do you wrote Finding Signal in a Noisy World, how do you find truth in a world that's built on lies in money? And you said as well that, in history books, that error code is in all of our history. So where do you go for the truth on big topics like climate change?
You have to think in first principles, and you have to, and I think what you do, why probably Bitcoiners and some people would almost tune them out, because they've gone down so far in the rabbit hole that they realize a lot of these structures are just complete lies based on top of manipulated money instead of who gets the money, and they're designed to drive the control structure system. But instead of utilizing it because a lot of times if somebody thinks you're a conspiracy theorist, or acting like that or yelling at this system, you only embolden them to their views. So I like to challenge it in a different way. And here's the first way I would do this. There is not, ask anybody or anybody listening to this, find a problem that you care deeply about, whether it's politics, climate change, whether it's immigration, whether it's anything that you care deeply about, and tell me how the problem is going to get better by manipulating pieces of paper to make prices go up unnaturally. And really spend some time thinking about that. Just, you're granting somebody an ability to create pieces of paper that costs society at large by stealing from them to solve this problem. So you're concentrating control to be able to do that. Now, I will gladly listen to anybody who has how their problem is going to be solved, but it isn't going to be solved. It's going to get worse, a lot worse. Now, let's take climate change as an example on there. So, tell me how to solve a problem of climate change, if you believe, or environmental damage. Let's use environmental degradation from a system that has to unnaturally grow forever by manipulating money. So most people need 2 jobs instead of 1 job, 2 cars instead of one car. They can't raise their family by themselves. The kids are off on their own. They need more government manipulated money to be able to live, to be able to support that lifestyle. Tell me how that could solve climate change. It must.
It's going to make it worse.
Right. It has to make that problem work. So in fact, I haven't done it, and maybe I will do it in the next book. But I suspect if you actually overlay the CO2 rising, whether that's good or bad, and the monetary printing with a lag, you'll find it's exactly the same monetary easing in the numbers. Right? It's caused from that. Not correlated, caused by more manipulation of money. Because the natural output should be prices should fall and everybody should be able to live better for less. And you wouldn't need all of the things, and you wouldn't need the bureaucracy, the massive bureaucracy to tell you what to do, because prices would keep falling and everyone would be better off. So the only way to solve climate change is from a system that allows prices to fall according to the free market. And then you would truly have abundance. So number one. Number two, for at a little bit. So that's a macro overall. Now let's say how Bitcoin solves that from the free market, from an energy perspective. So instead of saying Bitcoin today, say, Andy, you're a baker. You own a bake shop. And I come in the end of one day and I say, I want to buy all the extra bread every day. But I want a discount. So I want to pay less for than and you say, well, why not? I'm throwing it out anyways. And the next day you produce 2 times as much bread, hoping I'll come in to buy it. And I come in and buy it. Next day you produce 4 times as much bread, hoping I come in and buy it. The next day you buy a whole bunch more ovens, machinery, you hire more people, and you produce 100 times more bread. I come in and I buy it all. The next day, 1,000 times more bread, and you do repeat that process. And if you had an economic buyer that's always willing to buy on the margin everything you could produce, you create abundant bread, right? Through the free market approach. Now, instead of saying bread, insert energy. And that's what Bitcoin is. It's a buyer of energy wherever that energy is at the lowest cost. And it will always buy the additional energy. That's a Bitcoin miner. So the same way that you'd create abundant bread, you'd create abundant energy. You'd create a free market path to be able to innovate energy away from centralization. And you'd be racing all over the world. I've been to villages in Africa that have their electricity for the first time and lights on schools for the first time because of Bitcoin mining. So it is so opposite to what most people believe it is. It is so powerful for the environment. And that's just starting to be understood now.
Yeah, I watched the podcast you did, the What Bitcoin did one with Alex Gladstein, which I think was in a plane. Yeah, I think you just been, was it Malawi?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. First time on a plane doing a podcast.
Yeah, that was a good one. He's got some interesting stuff. But I mean, again, that concept of, because everything we've been fed about Bitcoin's energy uses, it's going to use all the world's energy, it's going to boil the oceans, it's the worst thing for energy. It's very difficult to get then people to understand that it's not just wrong, it's the complete opposite. It's the polar opposite.
Yeah, polar, not just wrong, not just yeah, exactly. It instead of using it, it creates the abundance and energy. It is the thing that creates the abundance and energy.
So, what do you think it is? Because you're quite sort of unique. You're unique anyway, but even within the space of Bitcoin, your kind of interpretation and the way you've understood this is still quite unique. Because I watch you on interviews, and you'll perhaps get to this stage in an interview, and then someone will ask you for your price prediction for the end of the year, and probably not really have quite got it, but you're always a gentleman, so you never look frustrated, you never look sort of disappointed. But I can only imagine that sort of there's perhaps a collective sigh inside your head. What is it about you specifically in your background that enables you to hold this kind of bird's eye view and understand it at sort of a systems or first principle level?
Yeah, you read the book. You read my book when I talk about error correction, and somebody asked me an interesting thing. It said they liked that I said error correction is the basis of intelligence, and so then they asked me what is wisdom, and I said a lifetime of error correction. And you could say that's what you're hearing. You make a lot of mistakes, and then you admit where you're wrong, and you try to find frameworks to be able to root out mistakes in your thinking, and that leads you to thinking in first principles, and it leads you to really kind of hold an open view and understand somebody else's view, not from I want to attack them, but understand why they came to their view. Because and then if you can understand that, you might be able to kind of lower your ego to be able to hear the actual message that's in what they're thinking. So I don't know, but probably that making lots of mistakes myself, and understanding that kind of we are all one. We're kind of all on. The world is constructed by our ideas that we put into our thoughts, words, actions. It's entirely a construct of what we decide. And so that is bound to be an interplay of a whole bunch of other people with different ideas. So you probably want to listen to some of those ideas too, to see where they might sharpen yours.
Yeah, I think that's probably been part of my problem with trying to orange pill people is I quickly get frustrated, and I'm certainly not seeing their viewpoint, and I'm probably not meeting them where they are. And you mentioned the word ego as well, which has perhaps got a little bit to do with it as well. But I don't know if you've ever heard of a guy called, this is perhaps getting off on a little bit of a tangent here, but there's a guy called Graham Hancock who he's a British journalist, but he spent sort of about the last 20-25 years investigating archaeology, and he's got a Netflix series. He was on Joe Rogan.
That's where I've heard it. Yes.
Yeah, so he's been on Joe Rogan a couple of times, but he's quite an interesting character. But they discovered, if you're familiar with Göbekli Tepe in modern day Turkey, they sort of discovered these sort of.
I've been to Turkey many times, and I said to my wife actually last night that's a place I desperately want to go. So.
Yeah, well, he sort of talked about this quite a lot, and it's this sort of ancient, for people who sort of haven't heard of it, it's this ancient monolithic stone structure that they've discovered has predated the pyramids by about 6,000 years. So it's dated at about 11,000 BC. And in his series, there's all sorts of other places dotted around the world where it points to the fact that these structures are beyond the engineering capability of what modern archaeology thought civilizations were capable of at that time. Like some of these things like line up perfectly with certain constellations and at certain times of the day, and it shows a sort of deep understanding. And it's Graham Hancock's thesis that there was this kind of ancient civilization that was highly intelligent, and there's some cataclysmic event that has basically wiped them from the earth. And you talk about intelligence being error correction, and if then civilization after that hasn't been able to build on the knowledge from that period because it essentially disappeared, then that would explain why perhaps for the next few thousand years those things weren't built. But it kind of throws, and he's got a lot of pushback, understandably, because it throws a lot of modern archaeology into really people that have studied this for 30, 40, 50 years and it's their life's work, might just be false and not true. And I am getting to my point here. This idea of Bitcoin being a protocol change and completely having to pivot what they think they know. How difficult is that for somebody to do? Because if somebody's invested their whole life believing something, the pushback on them changing their mind comes down to not just whether they actually believe it or not, it's whether they actually want to investigate it for fear of having to change their mind.
Yeah, that's kind of your neurons firing and you see, and you reinforce the world you see, and you'll discard any information that doesn't match your objective, or most people will. and they'll constantly reinforce, and they will believe that it's the world conspiring against them, right? When it's actually their beliefs that are causing that. But the more of an expert you are, the more, let's call it expert bias, right? The more of an expert you are, and I discuss this in the book too, the more likely it is that you fall into that trap. Because not just your wage and everything else is determined from that expert being the expert. You've probably seen a whole bunch of things that you thought might have challenged your beliefs that then turned out to be false. So you discard, and you fall into a trap of not thinking in first principles. And you just take that example. Now remember the time frames that you're talking about with the archaeological evidence now, going back double the time from where we are right now, all of the advancement to the pyramids from here, double that again to find stone structures that we didn't think were capable of being built. Until the pyramids. And so if you think about how large that time frame is, and now we have evidence that changes history books, but if you're inside that system as a historian and you've built your entire base of knowledge on top of that, that'd be really hard to take, because it means something is wrong in your in what you, and so hard to take, or you would have to discount the evidence, right, to keep yours. But we have both, and that's the same. Not the same, but it's similar in what we're talking about on the time chain right now that is Bitcoin. It is just a perfect truth of every interaction for the last 15 years on there, and it can't be changed. So now you have something that nobody can go and rewrite in block 5. Something else happened. You have a historical record that's every 10 minutes, that's not locking in new information, that is immutable. It cannot be changed. And so as long as that stays decentralized and secure and doesn't get co-opted, it changes the future in ways people can't even imagine right now. Most people can't even imagine. It completely rewrites the future from a world where, through a monetary system, you could say this: we've always lived in an extractive economy. Somebody had to lose for us to win. Whether that was we would steal gold from this country, or we would go to war. We would live in an inflationary system. Those people would convince it's somebody else's, get elected by dividing their country. Then it has to be somebody else's fault in another country, create a war, to go to war, to reset the monetary system, to then say we promise not to do it again, for it to start again. We've always lived with money in a control structure based on extraction from some of the population to enrich a small part of the population, always, through 5,000 years of history, through longer of recorded history. And this changes that to be in cooperation. So that would be a big mental shift to be able to understand, from a world where people are used to completely normal, that you live by extracting people and seeing from people and seeing the winners extract the most, to an honest system that doesn't work like that at all. You produce more value in Bitcoin for other people. Your value increases. It's in service of people forever.
And when you put it like that, it feels like there's not really a bigger conversation you could really be having at the moment. But it always sounds a little bit sort of hyperbolic when you put it like that. But
so Andy, that is actually the point. That's actually why, as you do more work on Bitcoin, you come to that realization, and many of the people that haven't done that work are seeing it as a Ponzi scheme, or how do I make more money, or how do I get rich quick? And they're getting trapped into all these other altcoins and different things, and then they lose the point. And that's what makes you feel like you're crazy against them, and them thinking you're crazy too. That is the point. As you do more work here, it touches, obviously, if money is a base on, or money or information that money carries is a fundamental principle in life, because all we do is trade with each other to get more value all over the world. If you distorted that, you would gain a whole bunch of power. If you can't distort it, it sets life on a different path. But to be able to understand that path, if humans have never seen a money like this before, or a protocol like this before, through all of this history, through all of our history books, it would be easy to carry your pre-existing bias into the new thing. And what you find in Bitcoin is, as you unwind some of your pre-existing biases and understand what it really is, you understand it truly is. It touches everything. It has to touch everything. And you could, if you talk about it like that all the time, look like a crazy person to people that don't know
it. It does feel as if it's rendered most other topics of conversation a little bit, not pointless, but it's made them seem less important, because most of the problems that people are discussing, they can't be solved unless the system is changed. So just changing.
I said to my wife, we went out for dinner with friends the other night, and they were talking, and they got to talking about Trump and Biden, or Trump and Harris, and I didn't bite, and I said to my wife, "Aren't you proud of me?" Because for me, I watch all of this, and they're so sure of their person is better than the other person inside a system that just gets worse by this. And I didn't bite and talk about Bitcoin.
Yeah, we just had a general election in the UK, and we've had 4 years, or probably longer, of the Tories, and everybody's been criticising them for ages and ages and ages. Everyone goes out, or 20% of the population anyway, goes out and votes for Labour, and a month in, and everyone's calling for Keir Starmer's head now. So it's kind of proof that nothing really changes by the year. It's still the head of the same snake, different head of the same snake. In terms of valuing Bitcoin, then, how do you value it? Because I think I've heard you sort of mention this recently, that people are still looking at it in terms of dollar or pound price, but how do you value it? How do you actually put a value on it?
Yeah, so layer one, and people should, if you could put in the show notes, that Finding Signal in a Noisy World article, so people can understand how a protocol emerges and what this looks like. I can understand people kind of valuing it from the fiat system through the first layer. They're used to the US dollars, or they're used to this, and they're living in a world where all prices are going up. So what they're doing is measuring Bitcoin in that same world, and they think it's going up. And so, but what that actually means is they're thinking, I'm going to sell my Bitcoin to buy other things sometime, right? That's what they have to be thinking. I'm going to translate Bitcoin to this currency to buy other things. And when they actually know that it's actually the currency that's being manipulated to make all prices going up, instead of thinking in currency, instead of saying currency, say pieces of paper I measure the world in. And then to prove this point, just ask them to go to Bitcoin price in the UK, and they could see the current price of Bitcoin in the UK. And then ask them to look in Egypt, Turkey, Bitcoin price Egypt, Bitcoin price Argentina, and they'll see all relatively different pieces of paper value for the Bitcoin. And Bitcoin doesn't care about your piece of paper. Could care less. If a government wants to print trillions of dollars more piece of paper and steal money from you, it will look like Bitcoin went up relative to that. But what actually ended up happening is all prices kept falling relative to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So I don't think in Bitcoin in terms of pricing it in a piece of paper. I think in terms of, like I said, pricing it, this house in Bitcoin, or my energy in Bitcoin. I think of, and what I've concluded, and what is true, not might be true, what is true is all prices are falling forever in Bitcoin. And they're continually over the last 15 years. Now, it might be a little volatile on the way through, but I imagine that volatility is the inverse volatility of the volatility in your manipulated money. So what's happening is all prices are falling in Bitcoin, and you could take any 4-year period of time, and you could evidence what I'm saying. Now, they'll fall faster in some countries than other countries, or it'll look like, if you're measuring from the piece of paper, it'll look like Bitcoin's rising more from some countries than other countries, because currencies are being manipulated at different rates all around the world.
I must admit, I changed my T-shirt about 10 minutes before we came online, and it's just about to see that one.
Kind of do you know Canute?
Yeah, well, I've read his book Everything Divided by 21 Million, which is why I sort of bought the T-shirt, which I think is it's a simple way to frame it, but it's so powerful because it suggests that one system is going to infinity and one system isn't, and that that is the answer, isn't it? So it's actually, over time, it becomes ludicrous to actually price it in, like you say, pieces of paper that can be printed to infinity. So I think in people's defence, if you've got debt in the existing system that is kind of, you feel is strangling you, and you price that debt in Bitcoin, I can understand why people do that, because that's what I sort of said earlier about the Titanic. I suppose is Bitcoin potentially offers you a way out of that by essentially paying off your debt, but that's the only way you can get out of it. But I don't know if that makes sense. But
yeah, no, it makes total sense. So in a fiat system that the money is being printed, essentially inflating the real value of the money away by manipulating money, then taking on debt in that system makes sense, because you pay back the debt with cheaper dollars tomorrow, right? So that makes tons of sense, and that's why you have an exponential rise in debt, is because people do that over and over and over, and it gets worse, and it keeps getting worse, and it centralizes. Rich get richer and richer and richer, poor get poorer and poorer and poorer, and it centralizes and gets worse. And then the poor vote for somebody to take back the wealth from the rich, and it gets redistributed. We go to war and reset the whole thing. So there is no place to hide. If you're really rich in that system and you think you're winning, you're losing too. There is no place to hide, because if society looks like that, they're coming with pitchforks for you. It gets worse and worse. So, but debt inside that system, the debt gets cheaper over time because it's inflated away. So it would make sense to take the debt in that system. In fact, Michael Saylor's playing that playbook by taking on debt and converting it into Bitcoin. Now, that playbook you want to be really careful with, though, because this existing system is going to be so volatile that if you took debt on the wrong time, or you didn't have enough income for a time that things got really bad to pay that debt, then you're going to get liquidated and you're going to lose all your Bitcoin. Yeah. But I totally understand, because it's a system change that people, by the way, what we're talking about right now, I think it's going to, over time, burn a lot of people. Like, it's going to hurt a lot of people, because they're going to be thinking in Bitcoin in terms of, how do I lever it and there is no one coming to save you. If your exchange that you're using is levered and people come to collect their Bitcoin, and you're levered against it, you're wiped out.
Yeah.
So hold Bitcoin self-custody. A lot of people are going to make this there's going to be a lot of wealth lost and gained kind of in this kind of short-term mindset about trying to play the Bitcoin game against leverage that like the fiat game was played.
Right. I think just one other thing that I just wanted to ask was, again, it sounds a little bit sort of hyperbolic again, but have we ever seen anything like this before in history? Like we've seen, you talk about protocols. We've seen protocols, although they are rare. But have we seen a protocol and step change that has the capacity to change, again, the course of the world in the way that this does?
There is no historical precedent for what Bitcoin is. There's that's why it's so hard to understand, because you really have to understand it deeply to understand that. And what I just said, if there's no historical precedent, that's kind of a big, bold statement. So if that's true, or if that is now somebody should do work and try to disprove what I said, based on because if it's true, you could say if it's true, it changes our future so insanely that we can't even comprehend it. So that's the type of rigor that you should do on the Bitcoin protocol to be able to understand if it's true, and then how much time you want to spend in it.
Yeah, I think, like I say earlier, about sort of conversations seem to be getting more and more pointless until you've kind of got the grokked this subject. So, but I mean, thank you for everything that you've written and all the podcasts that you've done, because your work has been something that I've stayed with for. Well, I've been it for about 4 years now, so I'm coming up to my first 4-year end, and it's easy to get kind of carried away with the number go up and all sorts of other things. But I think when you really understand it as a protocol and as a step change for humanity, it is life changing. It's again, it always sounds hyperbolic, but what and I won't keep you much longer. I realise we're coming up to the end of time, but what change has Bitcoin offered you in life then? Because you're obviously very, very successful beforehand. What has Bitcoin meant for you in terms of changing your life?
I don't know if it's in essence changed my life, as far as like just always really close friends, family, success in business. So I wouldn't say it changed life in that way, but what it did is allowed me to see some of my own biases in, like, here's a hard, probably my hardest one. I didn't realize that the place I was born and my living standards were not. I thought it was okay because I was good in business, I was successful, and I created it all myself. I didn't realize I had a lift to that spot that came at a direct expense from somebody else in the world, and their living standards were a part of mine. And seeing that I was extracting, not I was in it. I could easily turn my head and say, "Oh no, they can't do that in Ghana or whatever because they're." But seeing that I was a part of the extractive method to be able to provide my standard of living was a really hard thing for me to come to terms with. I didn't want to believe it. And so But once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then you decide, am I going to change? Am I going to put more time in the new system or not? So that if and then as a result of spending now the majority of my time in the new system and talking about it and investing in it and doing that, the beauty I see around the world of people doing the same, the type of people I've met all around the world is just, it's extraordinary. So my life is enriched by that.
Okay, well, thank you for that. I think, and thank you so much for doing what you've done today. You're not sort of, when I first contacted you, I wasn't really sure I was going to get a response, but you're exactly sort of who I hoped you would be, and you're truly a credit to the space. I think we're lucky to have you as an advocate. You're the way that you conduct yourself, even in sort of some of the more sort of difficult debates, like with people like George Gammon, you never lose your temper. You're always very, very, very calm, very, very great, like I say, a great advocate for the space. And I can see that you practice what you preach by the amount of time that you give to Bitcoin. And I think this is the only space, if people are looking for a reason as to what makes this great, is got a guy like you at your level. I'm just very much a normal pleb, and you've given me an hour of your time to sort of discuss it. So I'm really deeply thankful for that. And it makes me realize
we're all plebs. Go out and touch a million people with this, and just pass it on. So yeah, good on you, Andy. Like, huge congrats on starting the podcast. Wish you the absolute best.
Well, I appreciate that, and I feel very lucky to have you as the first guest. So thank you so much. I mean, is there anything you wanted to sort of add, or any, where people can find you? I will put things in the show notes as well, but
yeah, no, just a call out. My website, jeffbooth.ca, or I'm only on Nostr now. And I say that because there's just too many scammers trying to take your money. I will never ask anyone for money.
Yeah, I've just joined Nostr about a week ago.
Send me a note there. Post this there, and I'll share it.
I will do. Thank you so much. Yeah, so I definitely recommend that to people. I'll perhaps do another podcast on that, just to explain some things about that. But like I say, thanks so much, Jeff. Thanks for your time, and hopefully at some point we'll speak again. I will probably make the effort to go to Cheat Code next year, so perhaps I don't know if you'll be there, but we'll see.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Jeff. All right,
thanks.
Good to see you. Ciao.